A lot of players ask me, what is card counting? Card counting is nothing more than keeping track of cards since the shuffle. And the cards we keep track of are the high cards and the low cards. And by keeping this ratio of high cards to low cards, it gives the card counter a prediction on whether or not he has the edge on the next hand. A lot of players ask me, oh, you know, card counting is a great technique, but do you have to be a genius in order to master it? And the answer is no. Anybody with average intelligence can learn how to count cards. And this is how it works. We just simply assign a plus value or a minus value to specific cards in the deck. And generally the low cards we count +1, and the high cards we count -1. And what a card counter does is he just tracks each of these plus cards and minus cards as he sees them on the table, and he keeps the sum of these cards, and that gives him his running count. And that's what he uses to know whether or not he has the edge. Now, are there more than one card counting system? And the answer is yes. Generally, there are very simple card counting systems, and one of the simplest ones is speed count. There are others like the KO rookie count. These are card counting systems which I would recommend for average players who are basically basic strategy players and want to try card counting. So I would recommend that they start with one of these simple card counting systems. And something like speed count you can learn in an hour or less. Now, the more complex card counting systems are systems like high-low and KO. They are much harder to learn, but you'll get a greater edge than you will with the simple card counting systems. I'm always asked, is card counting legal? And my response is, it's perfectly legal to use your brain when you play blackjack. And that's all you're doing when you're card counting. You're using your brain. So the short answer to the question is yes, it is perfectly legal to count cards. Now the second question I get asked is, well, you know, are the card counters going to, or the casino is going to let you card count? And the answer is yes and no. Basically, if you're a low-limit player, they're not going to get excited if you're counting cards. But if you come in with a team of players and you're in there for hours on end betting thousands of dollars, yes, you're going to get the casino nervous, and they're going to watch you play. And if they feel that your play is too strong, meaning you're going to affect their bottom line, yes, they can ask you to leave. Most of the public has a misconception that if you're a card counter, you're going to win every time you play, and that's furthest from the truth. The fact of the matter is card counters will win, but they'll win over a specific period of time. Generally, we like to say we have the edge, and it's a long-term edge, meaning in the short term, which is any individual session or even a week's worth of play, and sometimes even a month, we could lose money. And the analogy I like to make is compare card counting to investing in the stock market. If you invested in the stock market for 20 or 30 years, you certainly have more money than you started with. But on an individual daily or weekly or monthly basis, your stock portfolio probably went up and down, but the curve went straight up. And that's what it's like with card counting. We go up and we go down, but the curve always goes up. Players always ask me, how do the casinos know that a player is card counting? And there's one characteristic of all card counters, and there's one thing that card counters have to do no matter what system you learn, and that's to vary your bet size. Card counters win money by betting more when they have the edge, and they bet small when they don't have the edge. So this bet variation is one of the indicators that the casino uses when they suspect somebody is counting cards. So that's why you don't want to go to a casino if you're a card counter and start betting $5 and then throw out a $100 bet. That's kind of a flag that lets the casino know that more than likely you're counting cards. One of the negatives, if you want to be a card counter, and I say negatives, is because a lot of people don't understand this concept of a bankroll. Generally, you need money in order to make money if you're a card counter. And that's because of the short-term losses that you can anticipate when you play blackjack as a card counter. So as a general rule of thumb, you need about 100 times your maximum bet, and that should be your bankroll. So let's say you're going to spread from $10 to $50 as a card counter. You should have 50 times 100, which is a $5,000 bankroll, set aside for the sole purposes of using it when you play blackjack, spreading $10 to $50. Now, as your bankroll grows, then you can increase your bet spread, and when your bankroll takes a hit, then you should go down in your bet spread and try and keep that 1 to 100 ratio. How long does it take for an average player to master card counting? Again, it depends on the complexity of the card counting system. If you want to learn the popular high-low card counting system, it's going to take you several months of practice, 2 to 3 times a week. And how do you learn card counting? Well, first thing you should do is read a good book on what card counting is all about. And then you need a deck of cards, and you got to practice keeping that running count, flipping the cards and adding the pluses and minuses. And you've got to be able to count down a deck of cards accurately in about 30 seconds or less. So it takes a little bit of a practice to do this. Now, if you're going to learn a simple card counting system like speed count, card counting system like that, you can learn in less than an hour. One of the most important conditions that card counters want to see in a blackjack game before they sit down and play is what we call the penetration. Penetration is the percentage of the cards that are dealt before the dealer shuffles. So for example, if you're playing a 2-deck game and one deck is played out and now the dealer picks up the cards and shuffles, that's a 50% penetration. You've only seen 1 out of the 2 decks. That's not a very good game for a card counter. What a card counter would prefer is a 2-deck game where more than 1 deck is played before the dealer shuffles. So the greater the percentage of the cards that are dealt, the greater will be the card counter's edge. So card counters always look for games with deep penetration. As a benchmark for a 2-deck game, you want at least a 60% penetration, and for a 6-deck game, you want at least 75% penetration. A lot of players have seen the movie 21, and they've seen the MIT guys beating the casinos, but they play in teams. And some of the most successful card counters are ones who have played in teams. And why is playing in teams so important? And the answer is, if you're playing as an individual, you're playing against your own bankroll. If you play on a team, you have a joint bank, and everybody on that team can play against this larger bank. So if you play on a team, you can bet at a much higher level, and therefore your profits are much greater. And you're doing this with absolutely no additional risk to your bankroll. So that's why a lot of the professional blackjack players tend to form teams when they play in casinos. If you go to the casino, you might see signs on some of the table that say no mid-shoe entry. And a lot of players ask me, why do the casinos do that? Well, if you ask a casino manager, why do you have that sign? Why don't you let a player jump in the middle of the shoe? He'll probably say because the players at the table don't like it when somebody jumps in, because they're going to change the flow of the cards and they'll cause players to lose. Well, that's a lot of hogwash. The real reason that casinos don't want players to enter in the middle of the shoe, it's because of a technique that card counters use, which is quite profitable, and the technique is known as back counting. And what card counters do is they'll stand behind or on the side of a table, they'll wait for the shuffle, they'll watch the cards, they'll keep the count, and when the count goes positive, then they'll jump into the game. They'll make big bets. They'll continue to make big bets when they have the edge, and then when the count goes negative, they'll leave, and then they'll wait for the next table to go positive and jump in. So that's a very profitable technique for players, and that's the reason why casinos have those signs to not allow players to jump in the middle of a shoe. There have been a lot of card counters who've gotten a lot of publicity over the years, and I think the first person to go on national television as a blackjack card counter was Kenny Houston. He appeared on 60 Minutes. and he kind of explained what card counting is, and it really became a popular avocation for a lot of people after seeing him on TV. And there have been other players who've gotten a lot of publicity, and certainly the MIT team received a lot of publicity. But there's also been a lot of players who haven't been in the limelight that are really legends in the field of blackjack. And there's a book called The Legends of Blackjack, written by Kevin Blackwood and Larry Barker, and it's an excellent book. Describes a whole host of players who have made a ton of money as blackjack card counters. And I encourage anybody who wants to learn about these legends to get a hold of the book Legends of Blackjack. And you can get that book on our website, bjinsider.com. A lot of players who watched the movie 21 saw this technique that card counters use with a BP, which is known as a big player. And that's a popular technique that the professional players use, and this is how it works. Basically, you'll have a player at a table keeping track of the count. And when the count goes positive, instead of this player making large bets, he will signal one of his team players, known as the big player, and he will then go to the table after he gets a signal, and he will make the large bets. Now, from the casino's perspective, he's just going to look like an average player walking up to a table making big bets. Now, he'll continue to make the big bets until his partner on the table signals him that the count is now gone negative, and then the BP will then leave the table, and then he'll walk around and he'll wait for a signal for one of his confederates who are on other tables in the casino. So by using this technique, they're having one player known as the big player making all the large bets whenever the count is positive. So this is how team players can win a lot of money in casinos, by using the big player concept. A lot of players ask me, how can I become a successful card counter? Well, one of the things you have to do is you have to be committed to learning not only the technique of card counting, but you have to be able to understand the risks involved, and you have to have enough money for your bankroll to sustain you when things don't go your way. And you will have some variances when you play blackjack, and sometimes you're going to lose some money. So you've got to understand all this. Plus, you have to have a certain comportment when you play. You can't just sit there and always watch the cards and never talk and never drink, and you'll just stick out like a sore thumb that you're probably card counting because you're just staring and looking at all the cards. So all of these techniques and skills you have to master. And the way to do that is, again, you got to get a good book, you got to read about card counting, you got to practice. And don't practice at home with a deck of cards when there's no noise, or because in the casino there's a lot of noise. So you need to practice at home with the TV on or the radio on. And you have to continue to practice until you can master the skills of counting down a deck. You got to understand risk of ruin. You got to have the right bankroll. And you really need to start out at a low level of betting until you feel comfortable that you're not making errors, and then you could advance to a higher level of betting. If you want to learn more about me and some of my blackjack books and some of the articles I've written, you can go actually to three sources. One is my Blackjack Insider newsletter, and you can just go to the site bjinsider.com. In fact, we offer a 3-month free subscription. Go to the website bjinsider.com/free trial and just put in your email address, and we'll send you 3 free issues of our newsletter. You can also go to my other site, smartgaming.com, and there I have plenty of articles on blackjack. And I also write a column on blackjack for about a half a dozen different publications.